Carol, I haven't heard much out of you.
Yeah, I'm having a little bit of a bug tonight, so I'm
Oh no.
but it's okay. Must have been those Minnesota my trip to Minnesota and all that northern climate up there. Of course, you were up there like a week before, also. Safe
Yeah,
state.
yeah. It started snowing like crazy before I left Duluth.
Well, I was very lucky. It was 60 degrees every day, so very abnormal.
Uh, you sound like everybody does around here. It seems like sinuses, allergies, whatever it is.
Yeah, it's a little early. I usually don't get anything quite this early, but I blame it on my wife who uh, got it first.
Always have to blame somebody, right?
That's right.
Not used to it being so quiet before we start.
That's right. Usually it goes all the way up to the
Yeah,
beginning. Yeah. So this is different.
yeah. How are you doing, David? You're muted.
David's doing fine. My appetite is beginning to come back. Had a good lunch, and we scheduled the unveiling ceremony for Wendy, which will be December 17th
Ah,
here in Tucson. And if any of you
yeah.
would like to come, let me know, and I can give you the details.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I bet you have still got good weather out there, don't you?
Yeah, it's not too bad. It's supposed to rain the next couple of days, but it's weather has been pretty good.
Yeah, I bet so. I think Martin's in Utah.
I am in Utah. It's been a
Yeah.
beautiful day today, but I think we're expecting rain as well, probably the same system as what David's getting.
Yeah.
I was talking to Lowell Line today, and he said that he'd seen you earlier the week up there.
I know. It was
Oh,
so we did a Salt Lake Astronomical Society demo for them in our LED dome, which is quite a unique facility, and so we had them come along, and at the end people are leaving, and Lowell he said, "Martin, do you remember me?" I went, "Heck yes." I saw him in Casper for the
Oh
eclipse.
yeah, quite an event
yeah.
there in Casper.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I didn't know he was coming. I kind of wished he said hi earlier, because I could have chatted to him a bit longer, but he was leaving for his Bryce Canyon trip, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll be in Bryce Canyon in 2025.
That's going to
So
be exciting.
that will be a lot of fun. Yeah.
It will be.
I'm looking forward to that. The first time was really amazing. I love the skies there. Utah is one of my favorite places to travel to.
It's amazing. And if you come through Salt Lake, you got to give me a call ahead, Terry. We'll show you our dome.
Hey, I will definitely do that. I'd love to see that too.
Yeah. In fact, I'd love to, I mean, it's far away, but I would love to do a demo for the league. If people are flying into Salt Lake early enough, maybe select a half day and they come up and take a look.
You know what? That would be a great idea because a
Yeah.
lot of people do fly in for this. So
Yeah.
yeah, we ought to see if we can't work that out.
Yeah. You're happy to make it work.
Yeah. Thank you. That's a nice offer. I'd love to see that. Boy, Mars looks so nice just sitting there.
But in my pictures,
I haven't seen yours
The
yet.
big question that we have for Mars is, did life ever exist on that planet? These samples are going to give us that extraordinary evidence.
The Perseverance rover is right now studying different rocks that are on Mars and collecting samples of those rocks and dust to cache those in a sample collection and hopefully have those picked up to bring them back to Earth in the future for further study in all the best labs that we have.
It's quite likely that in some of these potentially habitable environments that we've characterized very well on Mars, there might have been life that existed sometime in the very ancient past. That's the kind of environment that's being explored by Perseverance right now in Jezero Crater.
Jezero Crater is really interesting for this mission because we think it's an ancient lake, and there's this delta that leads into the lake. And that's perfect because if you think of rivers that are on Earth, that's where all of these signs of life get sedimented and stored for really long periods of time. And we're looking for life that we think existed billions of years ago.
And we've in fact got already a treasure trove of materials, of samples that are better than we even imagined we would have at this point. We have a diversity of rock types, including sedimentary rocks, meaning that they were laid down by water, and are fantastic at preserving evidence of ancient life. We've also found and collected igneous rocks, which are actually molten magma that solidified and can tell us something about the early planetary evolution of Mars. We will be able to learn something about planet formation, planet evolution processes from studying these ancient rocks on Mars that really then we can extrapolate to conditions on the Earth. On planet Earth, there really isn't that preserved rock record. But on Mars, we actually can see that ancient history of that early planetary evolution. How did planets form and evolve in the inner solar system? We will be able to get that from studying ancient Mars rocks.
What we can do with this mission is go broad across the crater floor, delta front, upper fan, and beyond, and then go deep by hopefully getting those samples back and doing every type of analysis you can do. And for astrobiologists, that's the dream. You get the breadth, you get the depth, and you get all the contents.
This is going to be a transformative moment for the science community as a whole, because it's going to offer us the opportunity to study these samples for decades to come, to train generations of scientists. When we look out into space, the big question as humans is, are we alone in this universe? Have we always been alone in this universe? And these rocks will have really incredible stories to tell about the history of Mars and the possibility of ancient life on Mars.
You're muted. Nope. Scott will be with us in a minute. I will go ahead and start while he figures out exactly what has happened. Good evening, and thank you for joining us. As you can tell, we're off to a good start here. We have a great lineup tonight. We've got David Levy. I can hear myself feeding back. And Carol Orge and Martin Ratcliffe. So we have got some interesting talks going on. And while Scott is working away, David, how about if we go to you and have you start us off? We always love to hear your poetry. And thank you so much for being here. I know the holidays are getting close for everybody.
Yeah, they certainly are. Thank you. Thanks, Terry. Martin was telling us a story earlier on before we started about when he was 20 years old. Art Hoag took him on a personal tour of Lowell Observatory. And that reminded me of a story when I was about that age. I was 19 in 1967. My grandparents and I went up to Lowell, and I took the public tour. And the guy who was giving the tour was filled with humor and scientific fact and legend and history, and it was just wonderful. Till finally near the end, now I had started comet hunting a couple of years earlier, about a year and a half earlier, in 1965. And so as we're getting near the end of the tour, one of the people said, "What's your name?" And he said, "I'm Bob Burnham." And the guy said, "You mean the Burnham who's discovered half a dozen comets?" And Bob sort of was a little shy about it. And he said, "Yeah, that's me." And of course, I had to introduce myself to him. And we had a wonderful meeting, and it really was perhaps the most wonderful observatory tour I've ever been on, to Lowell Observatory. So I think I share that experience in a way, Martin. Anyway, for our poem today, I'm going to use a very famous Canadian poet, Robert Service, who wrote The Cremation of Sam McGee. And I think a lot of you know it. And it's about this person from Tennessee, from the fictitious town of Plumtree, Tennessee, who wanted to go around the pole in search for gold. But he couldn't stand the cold. He just was freezing, and he knew he was going to die. And he asked the speaker of the poem, Service, if he would cremate him after he dies. Anyway, the next day, the lifeless body was taken, and he went a long, long time. He finally found I think it was called the Alice May. It was the ruins of a ship that had been crushed by the ice up there. And he decided there that he would build up the furnace and cremate Sam McGee. So I'm going to quote the last three stanzas of that poem to you. I'd like to read the entire thing, but it would take the entire session, and I don't want to do that. And I certainly don't think it would be very polite to Martin if I did that. So here are the last three stanzas. I do not know how long in the snow I wrestled with grisly fear, but the stars came out and they dashed about. Here again I ventured near. I was sick with dread, but I bravely said, I'll just take a look inside. I guess he's cooked, and it's time I looked. Then the door I opened wide. And there sat Sam, looking cool and calm in the heart of the furnace roar. And he wore a smile, you could see a mile, and he said, please close that door. It's fine in here, but I greatly fear you'll let in the cold and storm. Since I left Plumtree down in Tennessee, it's the first time I've been warned. There are strange things done in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold. The Arctic trails have their secret tales that would make your blood run cold. The Northern Lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was that night on the marge of Lac La Barge by cremated Sam McGee. Thank you very much, and back to you, Terry.
Thank you, David. That's an interesting one. I like that. So, all right. Well, Carol, how about if we put you up and you can tell us what's going on in the league?
Thank you, Terry. It's good to be here. Sorry for my voice being a little hoarser tonight, but I'll get over this in a couple of days. I'd like to first of all bring up my screen, talking about ALCON 2024, the very next convention we're having for the league. And that is scheduled for July 11th through the 20th in Kansas City. And so
can I interrupt you for a minute? What did you say the dates were? Did you say 11th through the 20th?
The 17th through the 20th. I'm probably dopey for all the medicine I'm taking, so that's probably a good reason. Thank you, Terry, for being alert.
No, I could have heard wrong. I just wanted to clarify. Sorry, I interrupted.
That's fine. Glad you said that. One of these things that we're doing, we've got some of the pre-plans done. Many of you out there, in addition to being astronomers, a few of you are Kansas City Chiefs football fans. And one of the places that we always gather as a city to celebrate the Kansas City Chiefs is at Union Station, historic Union Station, has a long history from World War II and so on. It also just happens to have a special planetarium, the Gottlieb Planetarium. And looks like we will lead off the convention on Wednesday night with a visit to that facility. I think you'll find it very enjoyable. And the second night someone on this broadcast will be joining us at Linda Hall Library, a world famous library of technical and scientific materials. And I know you're going to find that very interesting. David's papers are at the library, his observing logs, as well as his first telescope. So that's going to be something interesting as well. We're coming along very nicely in the planning. Much more will be announced, but that's what I've got on that part for right now. This has been a busy week as far as the... Pardon?
No, you're good.
Okay. This has been a busy week as far as the league. I made a very fast trip to Rochester, Minnesota a few days ago, and it was my honor to present to our webmaster, John Martin, the G.R. Wright Award. That's a service award presented by the league each year for someone or some bodies who have contributed a good deal to the Astronomical League. And so I was able to present that at his with his club meeting, the Rochester Astronomy Club. And ironically, at that same meeting, I didn't know it ahead of time, but one of our runner-up to the Horkheimer O'Meara Journalism Award was also there attending. She's a member of that club, and she brought her plaque along, and we were able to present that as well. So it's really a special evening for that, and it was really well done. We really had a good time there. So that's about all I've got for right now, Terry.
Okay.
We're coming along nicely on the convention, and the DoubleTree is going to be a very good location for it. And I'll have much more to report later. We will be visiting Powell Observatory. In addition, there will be a botanical gardens that we'll probably have our barbecue at. Much more to follow in the next broadcast or two. Now back to you, Terry.
That sounds great, Carol. I do have a question for all of our council members that are watching. Will council meeting then be on Tuesday or Wednesday morning?
The council meeting will be on Wednesday morning, the 17th.
Okay. So we've got a heads up on that one.
Yeah. It'll last roughly 8 to 5. I know sometimes we council members go out the night before, and maybe don't get up quite as early, but we'll shoot for 8 o'clock.
Yeah, we'll have to shoot for dinner the night before for all the council again.
That's exactly right. That's a tradition, and we'll pick out a special place.
Definitely. That sounds great. I'm really looking forward to it. The last time, what year was it when we were at Kansas City last time?
20 years ago. It was
no
20,
kidding.
Yeah, 2004. Wow. Yeah.
That's amazing. It is such a great place. And Powell Observatory, I really enjoyed my time Powell so much. It's in the middle of the US. That one I will drive to for that, because you're only about 8 hours from me. So it just makes it so nice for a lot of people. It's a convenient central location. And you guys always do such a great job. I mean, everybody does a great job here. So I am looking forward to it, as I am sure many are.
We've got a very strong core group that's doing the planning on it, and they are just excited. The ideas just keep on coming. We're trying to filter those down to a manageable 3-day convention rather than a 2-week convention. So we'll get there.
Yeah, that's just it. You have so many things there that you can do. I remember council got there earlier. Some of the council got there early, and we got a nice tour of the area restaurants, a lot of that KC barbecue. Yeah, we had a nice time there.
And I think especially, I just found out that we are going to be having a lecture at the Linda Hall Library. You should know that the Linda Hall Library is possibly the best library of science and history of science in the world.
Really?
And the fact that that's going to be a part of our convention just thrills me no end.
Can't believe
I have never been there, so I'm really looking forward to that too.
Yeah. And to reiterate, David, all of his observing logs are there. That first telescope, what a thrill that's going to be, David.
It will be. We'll see some of your history there, so that will be so interesting to do that.
Looking forward to that.
Yeah, I think we all are too. So, all right. I will go ahead and we're going to bring on our main speaker. But first, I want to talk a little bit to Martin Ratcliffe. I had the great opportunity to meet him at the last Alcon. And, I knew his name. I was familiar with him. I'd actually ran into him probably 30 years ago, maybe 25 years ago, somewhere where at an airport, I remember. But then lost track of. I had seen all your writings, the articles, and things that you had done. I had not been aware of your astrophotography, so I am really looking forward to your talk. It will be amazing to hear what you've been up to and what you've been doing.
Great. Well, I'm thrilled both to be online. Hello, everybody with the Astronomical League, and some good friends that I met this summer in Baton Rouge, and really thrilled to have this opportunity to talk about some of my observing. I've actually moved from Kansas to Salt Lake City about a year and a half ago. I dismantled my C14 that I use for planetary imaging, and it's not ready to set up yet. So I'm feeling the withdrawal symptoms from doing this. So it's great to be able to talk about it because it'll get my enthusiasm going. For my observatory is out back. It's I just finished putting shingles. We call them roofing tiles in England. Shingles is something else, but I haven't got used to that yet. But anyway, I got the shingles on, and literally the next day it snowed. And
oh my gosh!
So, yeah, it's a weird. We're in a weird weather cycle here, but yeah, I'm looking forward to presenting some of the talk. And so, shall I go ahead and share my screen and start?
I'll tell you what. Let me do an intro. Let me do your intro for you here because you're an interesting guy, and people want to know about you if they don't already. So, Martin is the former president of the International Planetarium Society from 2001 to 2002 and a contributing editor for the national magazine Astronomy. He has written the monthly Night Sky column for the past 27 years. Doesn't seem possible. Doesn't at all. Martin has published numerous books on astronomy, including Night Sky Discovered with Barnes & Noble, State of the Universe 2007, and 2008 by Springer, Cosmology and Evolution of the Universe. ABC, is that CLO or just CLIO 2009?
CLIO is, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. He has directed two major planetariums, the Boeing, I'm sorry, got lost. Cyberdome Theater at the I am just having a hard time to
at the
Exploration Place in Wichita, Kansas, and the Bull Planetarium at Carnegie Science Center in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania from 1991 to 1997. Martin joined Evans and Sutherland in 2021. They designed and built planetarium theaters around the world. He moved to Utah in 2022. Prior to that, he was the director of professional development for another planetarium company, and Martin has previously been involved in the development of the world's first interactive digital planetarium in Armagh, North Ireland. He has filmed total solar eclipses for television and enjoys Astronomical Society. He is a past council member of the British Astronomical Association and Society for Popular Astronomy. Then it was called, I think this is what that is, JAS. He earned his Bachelor's of Science degree from the University College London, England, in astronomy. Martin is an adjunct professor at Wichita State University and teaches an introduction course in cosmology. He is also a fellow of the Royal Astronomical Society and the International Planetarium Society. You are quite the busy guy.
So, well, I'm just wondering how I do all that in my spare time. That's crazy. Who is
you
that
have
guy?
spare. You have spare time, huh?
Well, somebody so young as well. How can? Yeah, I know. right?
Well, thank you. I know you really have been incredibly busy. I am so honored that you are here tonight. Thank you so much for speaking to us, and I will let you get started.
Wonderful, Terry. Well, thanks for that very gracious introduction. Yeah, I mean, I think the one that I find really amazing, and it's an interesting story, is I remember when I was asked to start writing for Astronomy magazine, and the person who'd done it before me had done it for 10 years. And I said at the time, I cannot imagine someone doing that for 10 years. I said 27 years later.
Yeah.
So sometimes you just love doing this stuff, right? So I'm going to just go ahead and share my screen and start. Right. Because I have, like any speaker, you've got more slides than you can handle. So I thought,
I know how that can be.
Yeah. So I thought I'd just start going through this and make sure I'm watching my clock. So yes, adventures in planetary imaging. I've always been interested in, all sides of astronomical imaging. I, started using film like many of you, and with the digital revolution over the last 25 years or so, it's been fascinating to see how planetary imaging has really come to the fore. But before I do that, I'm going to be talking about imaging of Mars. I have a particular passion about Mars, and you'll find out why as I go through the talk. But part of my earlier job as a professional development person, essentially I was training people how to program their planetarium systems. And I used to travel around the world a lot doing that. So I was very, very fortunate. And one very special place I managed to visit was South Africa. And I knew of South Africa's astronomical heritage, but had never been exposed to it directly. And I really fell in love with both the place and what they're doing down there. And one special place was Bloemfontein, which just celebrated their 10th anniversary. I can't believe that, because I did the training for the opening, and it's now 10 years ago. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and there's a very strong Mars connection, and that's why I'm going to talk about it. And so I'll introduce that, and then I'll go on to some of my own planetary imaging. So just to introduce you to the southern part of Africa. This is the country of South Africa. And you'll see the area on the left that says the Northern Cape is where the South African Astronomical Observatory is. They have a 10-meter telescope down there. Yeah.
Martin, I don't think we see your PowerPoint.
Oh, you don't see it?
Yeah.
So I've done a share screen.
My voice worked.
Yeah.
You're a little faint, Scott.
Am I?
Because he's at a large distance, probably.
How's that?
All right, the joke.
That's better. Thank you.
Okay, how does that look? Oh, I think that looks better.
Yeah, and take it into presentation mode.
Yep. So there we go. Because I did wonder, I thought, I can't see anybody's faces.
Perfect. So
that tells me, okay, all you missed was that. So you haven't missed anything yet. But this is South Africa. On the left is the Northern Cape, which I mentioned. They have a 10-meter and a number of other telescopes there. The Western Cape is where Cape Town is, and that's a very special place. I'll tell you in a minute. And in the middle is what's called the Free State, and this is Bloemfontein. And if you want to know the reference of where Johannesburg is, that's right up here. And well, I was living in Wichita at the time when I visited this, and Wichita is 35 degrees north, semi-arid climate, has 2 or 3 universities in town, and it's 3 hours from anywhere. And it turned out Bloemfontein's exactly the same, except 35 degrees south. It's a semi-arid climate. I felt very much at home there. It was really nice. So Cape Town. Cape Town is a remarkable place because for me, growing up in England as in astronomy, the Herschels are pretty famous. William Herschel set up a little club called the Royal Astronomical Society. John Herschel was followed his father's footsteps and took a telescope down to the southern hemisphere to complete the cataloging of the entire sky. And this plinth marks the actual location of his telescope. I'd been down there 2 or 3 times before I found it. It's actually in the grounds of a kid's school. And what I want to show you is John Herschel was a remarkable artist. He used a device called a camera lucida to make a lot of his drawings. And there's some remarkable books of his that have these beautiful drawing sketches. So I want to highlight the outline of this mountain here to you, because I took that photograph from the sports field of this school. And I'm going to go to the next slide. And there is John Herschel's drawing of his own telescope with the same mountain. So I don't know about you, but the hair stands up on the back of my neck when I stand in locations like that, knowing the history of what Herschel went through. And I could do a talk on Herschel, but I won't. I need to skip ahead. So jumping to Bloemfontein. So Bloemfontein had what's called the Naval Hill Observatory. It's right here in the center. And this was a telescope, an observatory developed by the University of Michigan. But since the telescope had closed back in the 70s, I think it was, and it essentially became derelict for a while, it was taken over by the university, and they built a planetarium inside there. So it's a remarkable place. I visited there. One of my first trips was up on the hill. And remarkably, there are 2 giraffes that live in this nature reserve. It's stunning, spectacular. I was taking probably 2 or 3 dozen photos of this giraffe, and suddenly he turned right over the dome. I loved it. So, but talking a bit about the history, we're going to talk about Clark telescopes here for a bit. So the telescope, an observatory, was called the Lamont-Hussey Observatory. Lamont was a wealthy gentleman in Michigan, and he funded the observatory for Hussey. Unfortunately, Hussey died on the way to South Africa. He never quite made it. But he had arranged for the 27-inch Clark to be built and constructed and delivered there. So you can see the beautiful tube there. This is going to feature in the history of Mars observations in a little while. When I went there, they had found the telescope tubes of that original telescope. By the way, the lens is at the University of Michigan in safe hands under Dr. Patrick Zeitzer. But they found it in an old fire station. Here it is. This is how they found the tube rusting away. And they have since erected the telescope tube itself on its original mount outside the dome in which it used to reside. So, and that's just been set up in the last year or so. So they're really, holding on to the history of what's happened. This is inside the dome now. There's a planetarium dome. Here are the seats. But they've retained the architecture. So you can go in behind, you see the brick walls. You can see, if you look closely, the wheel of the original dome as it used to wheel around. So a very evocative kind of space for the historians of astronomy, of which I know many of us are. And so I spent many times there training the staff. Here's the head of the physics department, Matti Hoffman, and some of his wonderful staff that I enjoyed spending quite a bit of time there. And but let me get to another part of what is in the area of Bloemfontein. Bloemfontein is home to Boyden Observatory. Some of you will have heard of this observatory, and you're probably thinking, well, didn't that used to be in South America, in Arequipa, Peru? And yes, indeed it did. It was the center of Harvard Observatory's Southern Hemisphere research when William Pickering was trying to find a good place to locate an observatory. So he picked Arequipa in 1890s. In 1929, Harlow Shapley moved it, lock, stock, and barrel, and telescopes and everything, to Boyden, because it was one of the outstanding regions of seeing conditions. And it was also, and this is an interesting, ironic situation, it was politically a lot calmer than Peru at the time. So they've gone through, of course, their many gyrations. But there are some remarkable telescopes here. One of these roll-off roofs houses the camera that took the plates that Henrietta Leavitt measured the Cepheid variables on and discovered the Leavitt period luminosity law. This is the library building. The observatory director's house is here. Harlow Shapley actually planted these trees out front in the 1930s. There's a 60-inch telescope inside this big dome on the left. And if I can find this one in the middle has a 13-inch Clark, which I'm going to mention a lot about. So my own personal story and passion for Mars began soon after my trip to Lowell that David kindly mentioned at the beginning of the session. And it was there at the Lowell Observatory I picked up this book by William Graves Hoyt, a very famous book about the history of observing Mars, and Percival Lowell. And in the 1950s, a few years ago, I'm going to tell you a story about how I wanted to get to the southern hemisphere to observe Mars at a perihelic opposition. And I couldn't figure out why I had such a bee in my bonnet about that. And I went back to this book and started reading. And there on page 9, right at the early part of the book, is that reference to the Boyden Station in the foothills of Arequipa, Peru. Now, Boyden was in my mind. And so I was really fascinated by this name and the fact that I could go there and visit it. So a little bit of history of the 13-inch. So I didn't know there was any audio with this. I've copied it from a friend of mine. I don't know whether you're hearing that, but that's David van Jaarsveld.
We don't hear it.
Oh, good.
We don't.
It's in my ear. I'll take that out of my ear. I'm glad you don't hear it. So this is the original 13-inch Clark that William Pickering ordered, really to observe an eclipse of the sun visible in California later that year. And they took it to California in 1889. I can't imagine carrying this thing up the hill. Anyway, they used that on the mountaintop for a while and eventually moved it to Peru. So here's the 13-inch Clark and beautiful mountain scenery here. And that was in the 1890s. And so I had the great fortune of having worked at the Bloemfontein Planetarium, and I was writing my astronomy column for the 2018 perihelic opposition to Mars, and I thought, I'm approaching my later years. The next perihelic opposition to Mars will be quite a bit sometime later, and I will be well retired by then. So this is the decade, the 2018 was the year that I needed to get to the southern hemisphere to see a perihelic opposition of Mars. So I thought, who do I know in the southern? Oh, wait, Boyden Observatory. So I wrote an email to Matti Hoffman, the director of the observatory, and I said, any chance I could come down next summer to use the 13-inch on Mars? And within an hour, he wrote back, said, yeah, sure, come on down. It was that easy. Before we came on this presentation, Terry and Carol and a few of us were talking, for any young people listening, it really is worthwhile asking the question. Don't be afraid to ask whoever it is, famous or not, ask the question. They will be very pleased to help you. So that's a great note. So I was surprised. I thought, gosh, this is kind of a childhood dream. And all of a sudden I found I could ask a question and just make the arrangements to do that. So I got to Boyden in July 2018, and here I am with the 13-inch Clark. This is one of my favorite photographs because that's a huge telescope. That is a huge telescope. And it is quite a beast to try and use because it's got a sector drive. It's not a full worm gear there. There's a sector on there that runs for about an hour and a half. So every hour and a half, you've got to lose your planet, recenter the sector drive, find the planet again, and start tracking and start recording video. But anyway, turned out, and I didn't know the history of Mars with this telescope, turned out this has quite a bit of history. But so does the Boyden Observatory. They have, here's the Common's 60-inch mirror from Ainsley Common was a British astronomer who built his own telescopes. He sold a 36-inch mirror to Crossley, who donated that to Lick Observatory. It's called the Crossley reflector. So interesting 60-inch telescope here. But another discovery they made in the back room in a box, and here is David van Jaarsveld. He's a historian at Boyden. They found this box that was gradually decaying, and there was a brass tube inside. And they thought, I wonder what that is. It turns out to be the camera that Earl Slipher used in 1939. And on the 20th of July, 1939, he took the first color photograph of Mars with this camera. And you can see down here at the bottom, there's Earl Slipher with this tubular looking thing. And there's a mark on it that matches the marks on this tube. So we know that this is the original camera. And it was sent, this was attached not to the 13-inch, but to the 27-inch over at the Lamont Hussey Observatory, as you can see from the title up here. And Earl Slipher published a book about photographing Mars as a result of his expeditions there. Those of you who have very eagle eyes can see my copy right there in the background. This is indeed the photograph, and this is the number on the edge of the tube. He had two camera tubes that he used to take those photographs. But not only that, I was in David van Jaarsveld's study at the university when I was visiting, and it turned out that here were the original plates taken by Slipher, and this was 2 days later, 1954. Oh, sorry, this was a few years later in 1954, where he took these images of Mars. But not only that, the very first black and white pictures were taken by the 13-inch. And I didn't know this. This was staggering to me. In 1888, they must have been taken from Harvard. And these are, sorry, jumping around. These are the original plates that David had borrowed from Harvard. Harvard College Observatory plate collection had loaned them to the university while I was visiting, just coincidentally. And so anytime, if you go to Harvard College Observatory to the plate collection, anytime you see a reference to X and then some number, X references the 13-inch Clark. So this is probably the first image, probably 13 seconds duration, June 16th, 1888. So I am now in Bloemfontein. I've got a week using a 13-inch telescope that took the first black and white picture of Mars. And I'm turned out to be the first person to attach a video camera to this telescope, which I couldn't believe either. I was just in Mars heaven. I see Scott chuckling there. It's like, yes, I'm a kid in a candy store. Awesome. I can't believe this. So, and here from Earl Slipher's book are images from Flagstaff, the famous 24-inch at Lowell, and a comparison of the images that he took in South Africa from Bloemfontein, made at Bloemfontein. So quite a historical place. Here am I in 2018 at the business end of the 13-inch Clark. This is just a small 8-inch on the side. You know how that goes with these big telescopes. Oh, I wish I could look through an 8-inch, say most people. But I also wanted to kind of capture some of the evocative images had a wide angle lens with me. So I took a lot of shots of the telescope looking at Mars and, you know, evoking the history of this. And here we are with modern technology with my laptop, a little ZWO camera catching some high-speed frames. And here I had to take this photo. There was one time I was actually looking at Mars through the eyepiece, and then I peeked over the top and I saw this view, and I went, you know, I'll probably not get this view again. I need to capture this because it's a memorable moment for me. looking over this huge telescope at the red planet that was literally directly overhead. I mean, how good does that get? And that's why people used to travel, or still do travel to the southern hemisphere to capture Mars. So, and this is what the Milky Way looks like. This was, I did a process of this in 2019, and nowadays I don't like it at all. It's too harsh, way overcompensated, way too contrasty. I've changed my picture since then, changed my processes since then. Terry, in the opening, mentioned my first start in the planetarium world, which was at the Almar Planetarium in Northern Ireland. This photograph shows Earl Slifer on the right-hand side of this picture, visiting with the director of the Almar Observatory at the time, Eric Lindsay, in the middle. And Eric Lindsay is the one who said, I need to build a planetarium in Armagh. And so there's a little bit of history, again, from Boyden to Armagh to, and Armagh also set up the Armagh-Dunsink Harvard Observatory at Bloemfontein, which is a remotely operated telescope, one of the first in the world to be remotely operated, is the ADH, a very famous telescope in that right. So what did Mars look like through this 13-inch when I had traveled all that way to see it, compared to the original images, which are down here? Well, this is my highly processed image of Mars. When I arrived there was a global dust storm. Of course there was. But I still had a lot of fun. It was very, very, very difficult to tease out just a few of the little dark features from underneath that very hazy layer. But it was with the 13-inch Clark, and it's just a very, very memorable trip. When I got home, I arrived home literally off the plane, and I got to Kansas, and I looked outside and I could see Mars in the sky, and it was about one of the steadiest nights I'd ever seen. And so I said, I need to go out and use my telescope and capture some images. So I captured this image on the left, which is a black and white. It's been through the full process, which I'm going to talk to you about for quite a bit shortly. And this is the image, color image that I produced. And it turned out there was another active dust storm starting up in this region on Mars. I was pretty amazed that, I was starting to get better images than the 13-inch Clark. Later that year, I visited the AAVSO meeting in Flagstaff and attached my camera to the 24-inch just because I had to. I had about 15 minutes before they opened to the public, and this was in twilight. I did not get a very good capture, but I wanted to hit the two telescopes, the 13 and the 24, that had been so active in imaging Mars, and managed to do that in the same year. So I'm now going to talk about some of my planetary imaging and just give you kind of an little insight into what it takes. In some ways, how difficult it is, but also how easy it is once you get everything right. And I want to talk about how to get things right, because I spent a long, long time trying to get these things right. 2018, I was getting some pretty good results, but nothing like what other people around the world were getting with the same gear. And I could not understand. I'm going to take you through that path. One of the benefits of COVID year, I mean, it might sound strange, but I lost the company I was working with shut down actually during COVID. So I lost my job. And during the summer, I just devoted myself to planetary imaging and decided I was going to fine tune my technique in that year and get really good at it. And so this is the trip that I took. So here's the telescope I use. It's a 14-inch HHD. I've got a 2x PowerMate Barlow, which is a very important piece of this equipment, an ASI 290 with Bada filters in a filter wheel. There's also a robotic focuser on here, which will really aid your planet imaging. It's very difficult to do it without. Here's typical conditions in Kansas, right? Wichita is right on about the edge of this cloud here, and this is a huge thunderstorm blowing up. And this really spoils your seeing conditions, right? We all know that. It's a bubbly mess. You can't see anything through this layer of atmosphere. So seeing conditions are really important. Seeing conditions tell you what your ability is to see very fine detail. You know, it's a dynamic pool of air. It never sits still. What you really hope for is a laminar flow where there's no real turbulence. It's going to be very interesting here in Salt Lake because I'm 6 miles from a mountain range. And so if I get easterly or westerly winds, the turbulence is going to be horrible. So I have to wait for north or southerly winds where I get more of a laminar flow to do my planetary imaging. But in my reading, I came across this article in Sky and Telescope, 1971, Seeing and Scintillation. This is an amazing, and you know, I have this large collection of Sky and Telescope magazines. My wife laughs at me because she goes, they're all really old. What use is that? And I came up with this reference and I said, look, I can run downstairs and pick that copy and go and read it. So she understands me a little bit more now. So here is what Andrew Young from JPL started writing about. And this is very interesting because what happens is you have a plane wave of light coming into the atmosphere, and our turbulent atmosphere messes that up. You have these cells of different size that are causing turbulence. And if you have a large aperture, you're getting turbulence from across many of these cells. And sometimes a large aperture can be worse than a smaller aperture in looking at detail on planets, because the wavefront from across this giant aperture is not coherent. It's just like looking through the bottom of a swimming pool and everything's all over the place. And I'm going to show you examples of that in video. So sometimes you can use a smaller aperture and you capture what we call a coherent wavefront. And in a coherent image, the image is slowly undulating backwards and forwards, but you can see the entire planet in detail. Whereas if you have incoherent turbulence, the thing is just a horrible mess. So that's a really important aspect of understanding what's happening. And today's software is capable of capturing sections of an image that is clear and disregarding the blurry parts. So here's a frame capture from this same 1971 article showing the photosphere of the sun, where regions are blurry due to these scattered wavefronts, but parts of it are very, very clear. And they talked about the goal of someday in the future of having high-speed camera systems that can capture these moments and software that could stitch the image together. Well, we have that today. We live in a very lucky period in history where not only is that software available, but it's free. It's free. So anybody can try this, and it's amazing. I will go back to my Mars Lowell at Mars book, because here on page 7, they talk about viewing Mars from the southern hemisphere, and they say at Boyden Observatory on a hilltop near Bloemfontein, South Africa, the seeing is good until the inversion rises to the height of the telescope, then it deteriorates quickly. And then it improves before dawn. So you've got to capture your moment. But this reference to Bloemfontein, I read this when I was 20 years old. 30 years later, 35 years later, I'm down in Bloemfontein observing. So some tools for looking at what the seeing conditions are. This is Meteor Blue. It's a very useful website because it can give you a hint of whether to get out to your telescope or just go to bed. This number here, the 5 and the 4, indicate the quality of seeing. And the third number is the speed of the jet stream. So here's where you have to just try and get experience of imaging. You just got to keep imaging any night that you can, and then get an understanding of your local conditions. And it's very, very complex. So my note to everybody is get out there, observe, and then figure out whether it's good the next morning when you look at your video, because you don't know ahead of time whether it's going to be good or not without lots of experience. It turns out these nights that we're saying the seeing is pretty good, it's like 1.4 arc seconds. This jet stream is awful. 36 meters per second is like looking through a jet stream, literally. So you got to wait for that to be a low speed as well to get good quality images. Now, the other huge difference was cooling. In my observatory, it would get over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, over 40 degrees centigrade during the day, and it would take 2 or 3 hours to cool off. And so I installed this cooler, which only dropped it to about 90. So it wasn't a lot, but my telescope was ready to go within about an hour. And what I would do at twilight, when it was in shadow of the sun, I would pull the roof back and let the ambient temperature cool the telescope as well. So it aided my observing. And I can tell you, after installing this, the number of times I could see an airy disk on stars went up like 70%. Here's what you're looking at. This is collimation, and I'm going to show you some video. These are still captures. This is on a pretty good night. This is on a really horrible night. So this is a comparison of fairly good undulating coherent seeing. The telescope's out of focus here on a star, and I've captured this video. And this is incoherent seeing. But if you focus, you can capture video and you see this. But let me see if, okay, here's my video clip. So here's the tricky part. Seeing in Kansas is never good. Some places are very lucky. Chris Go, who is a well-known imager in the Philippines, had beautiful seeing. His bad seeing is my really good seeing. There's another gentleman I'll mention later in South Africa, now in Namibia, who does some great planetary imaging. What I couldn't figure out initially, and this was my practice, was I couldn't really see this stuff. I didn't know whether I was in collimated or not. Is that central point right in the middle or not? And it has to be right in the middle. So my strategy for both collimation and focus was to take short video clips and process them the same way I would do the planets. And then I'm knowing what I'm going to get out. And so I could quickly process that in a few seconds, and then go in here and actually measure with a ruler to see if this was exactly concentric. And if it wasn't, I would tweak my collimation knobs like 1/8 of a turn and redo it. And I would spend, initially I'd spend 45 minutes trying to get that right. But eventually I got that down to about 20 minutes. So I could be collimated and focused inside about half an hour, which is pretty fast. Here's another similar video frame of, so this is trying to get focus. So I ask you to see, can you tell if that star on the left is exactly in focus or not? No, it's a mess. Sometimes yes, sometimes no, sometimes yes, sometimes no. That's my video capture. So it's very difficult to do that. And so when you get to the planet, here's a video capture of the planet, and you go, well, I can't tell whether that's in focus or not. And sometimes it is, but that's my bad seeing taking place. How can I get good at imaging with stuff like this? And when I process that, it comes out like this, which you go, wow, okay, well, that's pretty good. During that summer, I then discovered that I'm a lazy perfectionist. And it's very frustrating. That's why I got frustrated at this stuff. I thought, you know, if you're a perfectionist, well, it was news to me. I didn't know I was a perfectionist, but I wanted the best image. Well, Martin, you're going to have to go through the scientific process and actually measure this stuff. You can't just hope that it's right. If I'm looking at this going, yeah, I think that's all right. I think I'll record half an hour of frames. It's a waste of time. And I realized I was wasting my time. So what I would do is, and this is where I'll hop out of the PowerPoint here if I can, and I'll go down to here, and I would take, say, 4 images of Mars. This is real data off my hard drive here. And I would save the sequence, and I would change my robotic focus position. So this one's in position 2330. This one's in 2220, so that's 100 steps. This one's at 2250, that's in between. And this one's at 2300. So I have 4 different steps. And if you look at either of these, they all look pretty good. But what I found was with the laptop, I could process this through Registax, which I'll come on to in a moment, stack the images, 5-second capture. And what I do is I stare at this enlarged image and I move my mouse through all 4 images. Now you probably can't tell. Let me just, hang on, activate this and see if it works. Yeah, it's not working at the speed that I want it to. But if I wasn't sharing, what I'd be able to do was move my mouse across these 4 images and I would see this image. And it turns out the best one is this one. It is fractionally sharper than this one. You see it, you can actually see it change there. That's the extreme. And that's the level of detail I was going for. I wanted to be sure that if I record half an hour video, I'm going to be in focus. So, so I started doing that. And let me just see what I think that should play and show us a sequence. There we are. So here's the sequence of Mars where I've picked that exact focus position. And you'll see here, this is a 1.5 minute capture. I won't run the whole thing. You see here that most of the time, Mars is horrible. It's jumping all over the place. But if you capture enough frames, and with Mars, you can go a minute or 2 minutes without the rotation of the planet blurring the image too much. Every now and then, you'll see that little finger feature that I showed you in the still image, and it pops out. And so they're the moments that you're looking for. They're pretty difficult to see. So, so once you do that, you can then, what you do is you retire all your variables. You know you're collimated. You know you're in focus. It's not a visual guessing game. You've actually measured it. And the third part of the trick is your local seeing conditions. So here is an example of, this is why I say record a lot, you never know. 514, 524, 532, 537, 542. So it's over about a 30-minute period. Red, green, and blue images of Jupiter. Each image stacked as a monochrome into a color image. And you notice this one on the left's pretty good. This one is pretty good. Wow, look at that one. This one's pretty good, but fuzzy. This one's pretty good, but fuzzy. Previously, these were the best I was getting. And in 2020, I nailed it. I got really, really sharp images. And it was all to do with the process, the patience of setting up and doing all of that. So that's where I got to. Here's some of my 2018 images that I showed earlier. And the idea between each of the images that I take, the red, green, blue, and an infrared, it's very important to get a clear set of filters that cut off for each waveband. If you end up with a red, green, and blue, and I'm going to just say this because it's true, a cheaper set of red, green, and blue filters, they overlap their transmission on, let's say, between red and green. So a little bit of green comes through on the red, a little bit of red comes through on the green. What that does is blur the image. What you're trying to do is really select just the red, the green, and the blue with a clear division, and that will improve your images as well. That was frustrating to find out in a year that I was unemployed because, you know, that stuff costs money, but what else did I have to spend money on? So that's what I did. Fire Capture was the software I used for capturing the images. And Fire Capture allows you to set up automated runs. You can't see it very clearly in this image, but I'm capturing an infrared, a red, a green, a blue, 90 seconds each. And all I do is hit capture, and it'll do a run and capture the entire sequence. It will also move to my preset focus positions for each filter because they're all different. So that's very important as well. And after a while, you get to know the offset between, if you focus on the infrared, you know the steps to offset between the red, green, and blue compared to the infrared, and you can then just get very quick at it. The other thing that you want to do is capture as many frames as you can per second. Here I'm doing a 17 millisecond exposure. And so my frames per second here is very low. It's 56. I like to be closer to 100. And you want to get your peak brightness here. This is a histogram, and it moves during the imaging. You want to make sure that you're not hitting the right-hand edge, because that means bright white features in the atmosphere are going to get bloomed out in your final image. And so you want to make sure you're about 10% below that point so that you don't blow anything out. That requires practice. You can increase the gain, but that increases the noise. So it's a constant game between increasing the gain to not too high. As you increase the gain, you can shorten the exposure. So you're using shorter exposures and freezing that atmospheric motion. And so you just got to see what is the magic piece to that. I'm not going to go into a lot of this in too much detail. I'd be happy to chat offline with people via email or whatever to help people figure some of this out. But there's some great resources online also that walk through how to do this. Here are my 4 filters and my focus position. And I would use this for about half an hour to an hour, and then I go back and I'd refocus on the infrared filter and then do all the offsets and redo it. Because there is nothing more frustrating than getting up the next morning excitedly looking at your video and finding most of them are out of focus. So you may as well focus. Let's see. Oh, and the other thing that you can do on Fire Capture is you can draw a little triangle interactively on this image screen and capture a smaller frame just holding Mars in the center, and that increases your frame rate. So don't capture a full frame, because that's too large. You'll never get above 20, 30 frames a second. So you can grab on the screen here, you can click and drag, oops, and here you see actually my frame around Mars. Now, Mars at this point was probably about 15 arc seconds. So this is probably telling you something else that I got good at: polar alignment and tracking. Because if you can't track Mars to better than 2 or 3 arc seconds, it's going to drift out of this frame and you'll lose it. So you've got to stay on it. And that took quite a lot of time fine-tuning that as well. I got it to the point where I had a video camera on my piggyback guide scope, and I could position Mars right on a cross wire, and I would know that it was in the center of this field of view. So again, some of the things you get good at. AutoStacker is the stacking software, and this is a peculiar graph. If you're new to this graph, it takes a little bit to get used to, but there are 2 things happening here. In the background, it shows the shift in all of the individual frames that you're looking at. And it measures the quality of those frames by plotting a green bar, a green line. And so what this is showing is that only about 10% of my frames are above 50% quality. And all the rest down here are garbage. So that's a bit frustrating. But that's just Kansas weather for you. And sometimes you just have to deal with the weather that you have, or move. I remember a long, long time ago when I first started this game, I wrote to Chris Go and I said, how do you get the images that you're getting? You know, I've got a 14-inch telescope. He said, 3 things: location, location, location. Nothing else. Location. Got to be in the right location. And if you're not, you got to live with the weather that you have. So I know I've just got a few minutes left. I'll scoot through some of this other, I'll skip over that one. Registax is the software I use for sharpening. This uses a process called wavelet sharpening. What it's doing is changing each image into what's called a power spectrum, essentially. How much fine detail and how much broad detail is there? And you can use that process to sharpen the fine detail and get rid of the broad detail. And that sharpens up the image. So you go from something like this to something like that. So I'll just go back and forwards there.
Wow.
So the information is there, you just didn't know it. And you're getting rid of this, the smeared parts using this very clever algorithm that works on a thing called wavelets. It's probably too technical to go into the details here, but as I said, if you sharpen too small a feature, what you will see are all the pixels, and you won't see any planetary details. So you've got to use this carefully. The other thing is select only your good stuff. Here is an old school way of me going through all of my images. Here's 2021, July 28th. I think right. Yeah, and so I would record sequences of infrared, red, green, and blue, and I'd write them down, write down the times, and then I'd go through each image and I would circle the ones that were particularly crisp. And what I'm looking for is a red, green, and blue that all look good around about the same time. And so I circle those, and they're the ones that I process into a color image. I'm going to skip over some of the camera details because I know we're a bit short on time. We can come back to some of this discussion later if there are questions. Just a shot of my telescope that was in my old observatory. Hopefully soon I'll have this rebuilt, and it's getting close, getting very close. My electrician is coming tomorrow to put in the electric box, so it's getting that close, folks. I'll skip over some of this. I will mention about Barlows. If you use a classic Barlow, you're in trouble, because the further away your camera is from the Barlow, the higher the magnification. So if you're using a 2x Barlow and your camera is 50 millimeters back, it's not 2x, it's nearly 3x. And what that does is it dims your image. It spreads your image over a larger area on your camera chip and reduces your frame rate. And this I didn't know this ahead of time, but when I realized what was happening, I couldn't get the frame rates I wanted. So I went to PowerMates, and if you get a 2x PowerMate, a 2x PowerMate stays 2x whatever the distance your camera is from the Barlow. That was a game changer. And again, another purchase that I had to do. But it was worth it because it got my frame rate up to where I wanted to. So a couple of little stories to wrap up. If I have, what, 2 or 3 more minutes, Terry? You good? A good friend of mine down in South Africa, Clyde Foster, he and I chatted back and forth. He had identical equipment to me. He's the one who helped me understand the Barlow problem that I was having, because I had everything else was the same, and he was getting 100 frames per second and I was getting 60. And I needed 100. So it was the Barlow was the problem. But he was imaging one night in methane and discovered next to the red spot this bright, brand new object, which turned out to be a new storm in the atmosphere of Jupiter. And 2 days later, the Juno spacecraft, NASA's Juno spacecraft, was going to take this track over the Great Red Spot and his new feature. So he communicated with NASA right away, and they made sure they directed the camera to photograph the new spot. And there's Clyde spot. And NASA actually highlighted his own imaging. This is an amateur astronomer in South Africa, just really devoted to imaging. Awesome. Jupiter. He's since moved to Namibia, absolutely exquisite skies in Namibia, and he set up his telescope, got that open and running about 6 months ago. So here's detail of, oh, this was his white spot right there, Clyde spot, 2020. A funny thing happened 1 month later. So I'm thinking, ooh, white spots on Jupiter. Funny thing happened a month later. John Rogers of the BAA, a good colleague of mine over in England, 18th of August 2020, something you get to know are these central meridian measurements. And a Japanese observer had caught this bright white spot with these numbers. And I went, wow, those numbers look familiar. I just did that last night. Here are my images from one rotation later, literally one rotation later. And you can't see, but right there on, this is actually July 18th, must have been, I must have got some of the dates mixed up here. But it's a very similar central meridian. There is a new spot. And so it turned out, this was, let me see, look at my time, July 18th at 3:48.4 UT. Damien Peach from England uses a telescope in Chile. It's a 1 meter telescope, a little bigger than my 0.3 meter, 14 inch. 3:47, 1 minute earlier. So the two of us were out observing the same time, and that was his capture. It was a little bit sharper than mine. But I was thrilled to be able to be just a part of having some data that was useful. It's really exciting to get your own images of Jupiter, your own images of Mars. Here is where my Mars imaging went in 2020, my year off, or my few months off. Started in July, trying to fine-tune the focus and the collimation. By August, Mars was bigger and I was getting better. And by September, Mars was getting very close to opposition. It was 22 arc seconds across. And Ethan Siegel, who writes a popular blog, grabbed some of my images and put them in his article, which I was very appreciative of. This shows some of the quality of images I was getting. And again, when you hear that Mars is coming to opposition, don't start imaging at opposition. Start imaging 3 months earlier so that by the time opposition comes, because Mars's oppositions are short and it doesn't stay large for very long. So how good was it with all the effort that summer? This was October 22nd, right around the opposition date. And I started getting features on Mars that I had just never imagined I could capture previously. And in the infrared channel, they were just jaw-droppingly exquisite. And I got to tell you, I've imaged, I've looked at Mars since I was a teenager in the 70s. And every night I'm out getting images like this, I have to pinch myself going, I cannot believe I can do this. I cannot believe I can do this. And it keeps me going for hours because I just cannot believe the technology today is good enough to capture what scientists had dreamed of in the 70s in that article in Sky and Telescope. So I'm going to end there. Actually, I'll leave this up. There are a couple of really good websites. Damien Peach has a Patreon site that is very good if you want to pay a little bit to get his articles. But go to the Astro Imaging channel and look up Agapius, Ilya Agapius. He has a fantastic review of planetary imaging, and he taught me a lot from his talk from a number of years ago. So that's where I'll stop. Ladies and gentlemen, everybody, thank you very much for your attention. Hope I didn't go too long. Lots to talk about, and I appreciate you joining tonight. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Martin. That was amazing. I'm blown away by your imaging and the processing. My gosh, the detail that you've came out with is just amazing.
Yeah,
that
it is quite remarkable what the software can do these days, and there are newer versions of that stuff always coming out. So
yeah. Do you still use fire capture and auto stacker and Registax?
currently I do, but as you know, I haven't been imaging for a year. And so I have a good friend of mine back in Wichita who is imaging, and he has used a new software package. In fact, I'll go and look it up because I can't remember the name of it. Yeah, while you're chatting, I'll just look that up and I'll get that for you.
Okay. I do notice Scott has just dropped offline. Something's came up on his, so
Yeah.
as long as we keep going, we're good.
Okay, there's something I would like to say, if that's all right.
Sure.
I have attended many AL Live lectures, and I have to tell you that Martin, yours was one of the very best. I really, really enjoyed it, but
Wow.
particularly,
Thank you.
what that I really got to me was the historical section at the beginning. While you were talking, I was being drifted back into time, back into the early part or the middle part of the 20th century. And I could almost imagine Bart Bach sitting next to me, because when I was interviewing him for the book that I wrote, when he talked about the Boyden Station and the years he was there, he just had this smile on his face. He just loved it. And then years later, he loved being down in Australia. He loved the Southern Milky Way. He loved the Eta Carina Nebula.
Yeah.
He loved everything else. And so listening to your talk tonight, especially the historical part at the beginning, was almost like going back in time and being there and being a part of it again. I loved it. Thank you, Martin.
Well, thank you, David. I've been a follower of you for many years, and there's a few of your books on here. So it's hearing that from you is a true blessing to me, and I really appreciate your words. And I think also, we share that historical interest. I have to tell you, you mentioned looking at the some of the nebulas down there. I did one time get a look at the Tarantula Nebula through that 13-inch. To see it through that telescope, you have to climb a ladder. And I better tell you, if you get that opportunity, you better tie yourself down to that ladder, because I about fell off. I had never seen a nebula looking like that before. It filled the field of view. It had so much detail. I know in the Northern Hemisphere, we love Orion because there's all of that nice little detail. The Tarantula is like that on steroids. It's a phenomenal nebula to see with your eye, and it's remarkable.
Oh my gosh, that sounds amazing. Would you say that was probably your favorite view through that telescope?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, nothing has come. Well, I've had a few things that have come close, but that Tarantula Nebula image. Yeah. I mean, I have to say, seeing Mars undulating in front of me through that telescope, it was magical, even though there was a dust storm.
I can imagine.
It was amazing. I have found that reference to the other software, and I have not used this, but it's gaining attention, is called AstroSurface. It's for processing planets and sun and moon images. So definitely try and take a look at that. It does what Registax and AutoStacker does, but all in one package. I have not used it, but I encourage people to go and look at that as well. There is a learning curve with all of this stuff. So
I think with any software anymore, we have a learning curve, no matter what you're using. That was Astro what?
AstroSurface. And it's all one word. It's one of those where Astro, no space, capital letter S, surface. So yeah, go check it out.
Thank you. Definitely will. I see. All right, Scott has came back.
You guys, and it sounds like I have audio, so that's great. There's a question here. Kenneth Wilson says, Martin, do you still prefer AS to Registax for stacking?
Hi, Ken. Good to know you're online. So the general mode of what I learned from learning from other practitioners was that you use registex. Hang on, let me get this the right way around. As I say, it's a year or two since I used it, which is crazy. I want to get out there again. But you use AutoStack for stacking, selecting the frames and stacking, and Registax for the wavelets. So AutoStack is better than Registax at selecting the frames and which ones are good. And it's very good at making sure that quality selection is good. And then Registax, has a very advanced wavelet processing.
Excellent. Okay.
But I believe the Astro Surface combines the best of both of those in a single package. So a lot of it depends on, what are you used to using? But that's where it goes. Thanks for your question, Ken. I also see Carlos, great to see you online as well. Thank you very much for your great comments there. I appreciate it.
Yes, I think you gave one of the most thorough processes of imaging planetary that we've had on the program. Although we've had some very good speakers, you always do, Terry, so that's wonderful. And I really also enjoyed the history of, kind of you taking us through the 13-inch and the 27-inch, I believe. And so that's, those kind of moments are unforgettable. And for those of you that get these opportunities, and amateur astronomers sometimes have these wonderful gates just to swing open wide, and you get to go to these places and meet these people. And if you think it's going to happen again, well, think again, okay? Because it's probably not, okay?
Probably not.
With amateur astronomers get to experience back-to-back, once-in-a-lifetime events all the time. And so, if you're kind of an armchair astronomer, you haven't been very active, you want to get involved with the league, and you want to, say yes to a lot of things, because it's going to be amazing.
Definitely. I think the more you get involved in and the more you reach out and show your interest, I really think it does open doors. And I think it's like we were talking, very important to do that, because the worst somebody can do is say, hey, I'm really sorry, I can't. But if you don't ask in the first place, you're never going to know. So reach out. There are a lot of people that are willing to help and very knowledgeable.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, Martin's one of them here.
Definitely.
Saying, hey, email me. Well, if this was, if you were taking regular photography classes to learn from someone that has the experience that Martin has, would cost you a small fortune. Okay.
Yeah.
So
definitely.
Oh, maybe you should charge, Martin. I don't know. So.
What you're saying, Scott, is you're setting me up for my retirement plan. Is that it?
That's right. Well, you'll never retire because you'll always be knocking on your door. So
yeah.
Yep.
Well done, Martin.
Thank you, Carol. Very much appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure.
Oh, great. Okay.
All right.
So we're going to give you the spotlight here, Terry, and you can close the show. I had, if you saw me have a couple of technical glitches, I apologize for that. My computer during the middle of this program just completely shut down. That is the power of this whole system, that we were able to still be broadcasting, and I was able to restart my computer, change out a mouse, and just get everything going back on. So anyhow.
Yes, we're glad you came back, Scott.
Me too.
I saw that you are host, and I thought, oh no, Scott has dropped off. So, all right. Well, thank you again, Martin. Thank you, Carol. Martin, I love the talk. I mean,
Thank you, Terry.
hopefully we can get you back again next year. I would love to have you come on again if you have time. I know you're busy.
We should do eclipses. I think there's an eclipse next year, right?
Oh, there's an eclipse. That's right.
Yeah, I think there's a lunar one, isn't there? Yes. Yeah, I think everybody's looking forward to the total solar eclipse. There'll be so much information. I think I can think of people off the top of my head to put a panel together that would be really good for this show. We'll have to think about that. So, Carol, thank you. I know you've been running around all over the place. It seems like all of the officers of the league here lately are on the road. I think I'm finally home for at least till March. So we're doing pretty good here. And so, Scott, thank you for doing this and for coming back on. I do appreciate that.
Again, apologies for technical difficulties, but this
Hey, that happens. Yeah, it happens. I was just kind of waiting for everything to drop offline there for a minute. So apparently, if you drop off, it still stays online. So that's good.
It's happened to me a couple of times during thunderstorms where we had something happen. So,
Okay.
Where power went out in the building, and it still works.
Oh, yeah. Wow. All right. What I will say is December 1st will be the next AL Live, and Kelly Beatty from Sky and Telescope Magazine will be joining us at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. So please write it on your calendar. December 1st, Kelly Beatty will be with us. So thank you again, everybody, for being on. I really appreciate it. You have a great Thanksgiving, and everybody out there watching, thank you. And you also have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Enjoy yourselves. And we will see you again on December 1st. So thank you very much. And thanks again, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you. All right.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Also, next Tuesday will be the 136th Global Star Party, and it's going to be about the size of the universe. So and we have a very, very special guest that will be coming on. They'll be introduced by David Levy. So we'll see you very soon next Tuesday.